Welcome to the Department of Life Sciences podcast for Women at Imperial Week 2026. International Women's Day 2026 centres on the theme Give to Gain, the idea that progress happens when we intentionally give respect, voice, care, knowledge, opportunities and resources to others. In a university community, that giving doesn't only apply in lecture theatres or laboratories. It happens in offices, technical spaces, meetings, emails, and everyday interactions that keep the system running. We're bringing together voices from across the Department of Life Sciences, from administration, technical teams, research, and teaching, to reflect on what giving has meant in their working lives and what we can all gain when equity and support are shared responsibilities.
In this episode, we are joined by Anita. Anita, could you tell us a little bit about your role at Imperial, a fun fact, or maybe a part of your role that you find most rewarding?
Yeah, hi Josh. Thank you very much for inviting me to this season of talks. Yeah, I could maybe give you an outline of my kind of history in terms of education and research, the same I tell my students. So I went to state school where I loved English literature and the sciences, and no one in my family had been to university. And then when an English teacher said, I think you should apply to a university, I thought, okay, give it a go. And I ended up at Oxford doing zoology, which I really, really loved. And I feel very privileged that I went through education at a time when students were allowed to explore the subject freely. And there was much less focus on kind of teaching to the test and mark schemes and keywords and so on. That had its, disadvantages. I completely acknowledge that. But it also gave students a huge freedom to explore a subject in the ways that they enjoyed and to create their own knowledge and ideas, which I really relished. So I loved education. I then went to a series of seminars about developmental biology, and I loved that. So I thought, well, let's try a PhD. I want to carry on learning. And I went to a group in University College London, and they showed me a picture of their results. And I'm quite weird, but it was a single cell in the developing nervous system. And it just gripped me. I thought, goodness, how does that single cell know what it's got to become and take part in creating the amazing central nervous system? And luckily, they took me on. They liked my kind of enthusiasm for learning, and I loved my time there. I really, really loved research. Then I moved to King's in Drury Lane, actually, where I worked on synapses and Wnt proteins and was lucky to publish quite well there. And I can see the results of that publication still being used in things like Alzheimer's research, which is lovely, very satisfying. Then I took my science knowledge to Sweden because I wanted to try another country, another culture. So I went to the Karolinska, where we worked on dopaminergic neurons and stem cells. Really loved my time there. Then I came back to Imperial as a PI. But for various reasons, I switched to a teaching focus track, which was what Imperial was sort of experimenting with at the time. And it's really developed. You can now have a very good professional career all the way up to professor based on teaching in higher education. And what I really, really love is hopefully sometimes I can show students what it is to think and be like a researcher and to enjoy that process, to kind of free them from worrying too much about grades, although I realise they're important, to, realising what we do and don't know in a subject and having the confidence to realise that they could fill in some of those knowledge gaps. So that's what I really love day to day.
I mean, that's really inspiring to hear was how you were captivated by science from the start. And I think one thing you picked up on that I thought was really, really nice is this kind of, now we always talk about studying at university, but I guess back in the day, people used to say you used to read for a degree. And I guess that's kind of what you're alluding to.
Yeah, I wonder if we'll shift back to that, if we'll, yes. I think, we now have the technology where all of that sort of factual knowledge will be even more so at our fingertips. And maybe, hopefully, on a good day, I believe, that it might free up us to use our human intelligence in a more creative, intellectual risk-taking way, and let's see what comes out of that. That would be really exciting to see. For example, when I go on school outreach trips, I meet fantastic natural scientists who are really creative, come up with solutions and ideas that they want to explore, but they will never achieve the grades to get somewhere like Imperial, and I think that's a terrible waste of their potential. So I like the idea of welcoming everyone into thinking and being like a scientist or whatever they're interested in. Let's just welcome everybody into that and see what happens, really. That'd be exciting.
Yeah, and I think what's really nice is you've spoken a lot about, the reasons why you got into the discipline that you got into. And I just wondered what motivated you to pursue the teaching focus route?
So I am quite old. Luckily, there's no visuals here, but I am quite old, and things were different back in the day. I think things have improved now, but I know when I reached the stage when people were telling me you should, develop a research group of your own, I loved the idea, but I didn't really know how to do it. It's a very complicated role. You have to manage people's careers. You have to get money in. You also, back then, were expected to teach and do admin. And very naively, I probably said yes to too many things and got involved in quite a lot of other activities. And part of that was I didn't get enough money fast enough. And also priorities around me changed a little bit in the field of neuroscience. So at that time, it was decided maybe we won't compete with other hubs of neuroscience like Cambridge and UCL in our case. So at that time, the timing was just a bit wrong. I didn't quite know how to do it. My mentor, lovely guy, but just about to retire. And I remember asking him, how do you balance maybe having kids, for example? And he just said, oh, I don't know. My wife does all that. And that wasn't my lived experience, but that was back in the day. And now I really encourage people to seek mentorship, see how people manage to preserve their career and advance their career, how they manage to set up boundaries and look after their own time. And it's wonderful to see other people being included in academia. So, if there's a male PI and they want to not have a meeting at 6 p.m, but want to do bath time or school pickup or whatever, that's okay now. And that will push change. And I have seen a lot of change, which has been wonderful. So I fell at that early career research host, if you like. I still really miss doing research full time. But on the other hand, if you spark sort of research thinking in a lot of undergrads and even postgrads, you can have a huge influence on, knowledge discovery and innovation. So there is that as well. But I do miss staring down the microscope and wondering about cell biology. I miss oligodendrocytes in particular.
I think what you've highlighted is something that other people have spoken about on this podcast series is once you get to the permanent position, the tenure position, the kind of part where you are now managing all of these different research grants, managing different people, nobody trains you how to be a project manager.
Yeah. I think academia has woken up to that, and there are initiatives like the Wellcome Trust sort of examination of research culture and so on. And, a little bit of investment would really help more early career researchers establish themselves. It's those early years where you're very vulnerable, I think, and where successful universities sometimes don't need to get you over that hump, really. They know if you don't get past those early years, someone else will come in who will, So it is good that academia is starting to question their culture and genuinely to include more people with more diverse ways of working. It's just more interesting, actually, and it's more likely, I think, to solve global challenges. If there's groupthink by people who all look and live very similarly, I don't think we're going to address the problems that we're facing very well. So I think it's really important that we can examine culture and really reward different types of working.
I think that's a really nice way to kind of wrap up. And opening this up a little bit more is we have this theme for International Women's Day this year, which is the give to gain. And I just wondered, when you hear that theme yourself, what does that mean to you?
Yeah, so part of my work, and it was a really significant part until very recently, was as a mental health first aider. So I would talk to students when they were in distress or when they just wanted to discuss an aspect of their life, maybe a relationship or financial problem. And we would just have chats. And I was having quite a few of those every week. I was also helping colleagues as well in terms of sort of trade union casework or as a mental health first aider as well. And that was giving. That was giving, caring work, which I felt very privileged to do. Feedback suggested that it was quite useful as well. So I just wanted to check that I was doing it okay. And I think it was useful. And when I hear the word give, there are lots of people who give and give and give. And it does sometimes fall along gendered lines or along minority group lines. So you will find women tend to give more often, perhaps. Ethnic minority people will tend to give in service for their other colleagues within that group. LGBTQ plus people will tend to do work to support other LGBTQ plus people and so on. So I will do it absolutely willingly, but I think sometimes in academia and elsewhere, it's exploited a little bit and it's not acknowledged as real work. So that's a bit of a bugbear of mine. Just, if people are giving several hours a week to support other people in their careers or to look after people in mental distress, then that is work and it should be acknowledged. It should be part of your workload. It should be part of the discussions about your career progression and your promotion. Sometimes management, everywhere really, sometimes management says, yes, of course we want to have Women's Week, or of course we want to have, Pride or whatever, but they don't actually say, okay, the people doing the work behind this should really have that work valued, properly valued. When I hear that, I think giving is wonderful, but don't exploit it. A lot of academia runs on unpaid work that is sometimes quite damaging to people. You can run people into the ground. Burnout is a real thing. And I saw it, for example, after the Black Lives Matter movement. A lot of our very courageous, hardworking, fantastic Black students were putting a lot of effort into that and burning out. And there wasn't enough allyship to take on that work burden. But actually, management have become more aware of the work that was being done, of the need for care in our university. So they have paid for people to come in and take that as their full-time role. It was just that for quite a long time, there were lots of us doing this various caring work just because we took it on. But now there's a bit of more of awareness higher up in institutions that, if you want this to be done, maybe get someone in to focus on it full time and look after that person. Yeah. So I still do a little bit, but it's when you stop doing so much, you're just like, whew, that was actually becoming quite a big part of my job, which I didn't begrudge at all, but wasn't really acknowledged. And I know that's the same for a lot of my caring colleagues. And it does, when you notice some people succeeding because they say no to any of that extra work, that's a choice, but that's not really fair. And I don't think that necessarily establishes a very good working culture. Don't just talk the talk about all of these initiatives, actually resource it and look after the people doing the work.
Great. And kind of thinking about your whole career, is there a time when somebody is giving you support that made a real difference? And that support could be giving you time or flexibility, trust, advocacy.
Yeah, so I thought about this, but actually I could only think of 2 examples. And I hope things are changing now. I really do hope things are changing. One of them was when I was going through a really difficult personal time that carries risks. And someone just popped in and just said, "Are you okay?" And I was like, it just broke the dam because I was in floods of tears. I'm so used to doing that for someone else. That was the first time in decades that anyone at work had said that. And I'm not expecting work to love me back. I'm not expecting work to be my best friend or my carer at all. But it was quite shocking that was the first time. And another time was when we had a little discussion about it. It was called then it's kind of a career review thing that you're meant to have quite regularly. And it was about acknowledging what I was doing. And it can be the same for other colleagues. So this caring work had kind of crept into a thing. It wasn't on my timetable necessarily, but it was taking quite a long time. And my colleague, who was very busy, I understand why they didn't know what everybody was up to. No one can really. And that's an advantage of academia as well. There's a lot of sort of flexibility and autonomy. But yeah, they just said, gosh, I didn't know that this was happening. There has to be some delegation of another thing that you're doing. And yes, let's give that to someone else who might need that experience as well. And that it's really nice if a senior colleague notices that and has a chat with you. Do you want to do this? Do you want to share that work? Maybe this person would welcome that experience. Let's give them a chance. That conversation was quite powerful, I thought, really helpful.
Good. It's really good to hear that, because I think in academia, we do tend to accumulate roles over time, and then those roles are never relinquished.
A little bit, rotate roles. My colleague said, he was given a course and it was like a death sentence. It's assumed he'll do that forever. And maybe that's not a good thing. Maybe we could mix it up a little bit.
So, and I just wondered, what are other ways that you try and give to others even in small or informal ways that you try and do that amongst your colleagues or amongst your students?
When I say mental health first aid, it's not always as formal as that. I don't say, let's talk about your mental health. It can be, you just notice someone who's having a tough time, or currently I've got the sort of headspace to focus a little bit more on neurodiversity and the experience of our neurodiverse students. I've got lots to learn because everyone's different, but that's been really satisfying. Just, I know I can do part of that better now. So I'm enjoying that. So just little things like your slides, glary, little things like that. Inclusivity, which, as we all know, tends to be good for everybody. It's not just for one subset of us, it helps everybody. That's something. So EDI work, just being aware of that, trying to be an ally. Also, spreading the word of self-care as well, boundaries, not necessarily listening to the messages that you might be getting from the system or social media or your very competitive classmates, but boundaries. What do you value? How are you going to keep yourself safe and happy and balanced and filter out some of the noise that you find a bit toxic?
I think that's great. I think just asking people, how are they? And although I say small and informal, it doesn't mean that they are small in gesture too. And I just wondered, is there a piece of advice you would give yourself?
Yeah, I think obviously teenagers aren't necessarily going to listen to their own advice. I think I kind of muddled along. I did things because I loved them. And that was incredibly lucky. I was very, very, very lucky, very privileged to just love every stage of it. I've been super lucky. I think the world is more challenging now. So I would still encourage people to do what they love. I think it will take you a long way. But I would also encourage a little bit more boundary setting, a little bit more being aware of the limits to your time and energy, being empowered to say no sometimes. I remember quite a few colleagues when I joined at a certain stage said, just say no. And that was quite gendered, actually, that you could see in general, the women saying yes more to various committee work and stuff, whereas the men were like, no, it's not going to serve me. It's not necessarily super important that this happens. I'm going to say no. And that respect for myself and saying what I needed and valuing what I needed, I certainly haven't done that. And I'm better at doing it for other people than myself. So at my ripe old age, I'm sort of learning that it's okay to say no, to watch your boundaries, because burnout is a thing, and you can't give. It's not sustainable. So I think that's my general life learning, really. And I think life is tougher at the moment for a lot of people. So I think that self-care and the boundaries are really important, actually. But I was lucky not to need them so much during the time when I was young, but I think you need them more now.
Yeah, and I think all it takes is a single grain of rice to kind of tip that scale. Attrition that can happen over time by just taking on that extra activity, by just saying yes at that one point, having boundaries, and have the confidence and have the skills to be able to put those boundaries in place is also important.
Absolutely. And that people will listen and respect those boundaries as well. And that you do have a healthy working culture. People are allowed to have life outside their workplace. In fact, it will energize and, fertilize their working life, and part of that extra curriculum work might be caring as well. You might have a partner, you might have sick parents, kids to look after, or your community to look after. That's give as well. It's not just at work.
Exactly. It'd be really nice to kind of end in thinking about what's something that you would change either within the department, within the faculty, within Imperial, or even within kind of the wider higher education context, considering this theme of give to gain.
It would be giving students more of a flavour of exploratory learning. I've just had some students in the lab, and there was such anxiety about, is this the right answer? And I was just saying, you designed that experiment, that's the result your experiment got. That's a valid answer. Now think about that. And I just hate that sort of anxious, and I know it's because that's how they've been trained currently, that anxious, is this the right answer? Well, it's, this experiment has never been done. It's your answer. Let's discuss that. I would like some loosening up of there is one right answer, there's a mark scheme, there's memorization, to more of let's use what we know, apply it here, have a think, discuss it with colleagues, and have a bit more, more thinking, less memorizing and less swatting and for the test. That's what I would like to give. We had, like back in the day, this sounds so old now, doesn't it? But we would have final year exam questions like a single word, water, and you were just allowed to, that was the starting point, just tell us a story, tell us what you know about water and why it's significant. These days, it's so much more regimented. And I think sometimes that suits students, but there are lots of students I see who they're a bit disappointed with that. That's not really what, and we lose them. We lose them to, and it doesn't have to be science research, any research, any exploratory kind of problem solving or discussions. I think we should have more debates, because global problems don't necessarily have a simple answer at the moment. They're incredibly complex, dynamic, multidisciplinary, multi-perspective. How we've trained our students recently is nothing like that. That's what I would do.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. But that brings us to the end, really, Anita.
Okay.
And I just really want to say thank you very much for being on this podcast for Women at Imperial Week and the International Women's Day of 2026. It's been a real pleasure speaking to you.
Thanks, Josh. And I, love to everybody out there during this week. Thank you very much. Bye.